2 out of every 3 females in Ghana are unemployed. That's according to findings of the annual Household Income and Expenditure Survey released by the Ghana Statistical Service covering the period 2022. In all, over 1.7 million Ghanaians are unemployed, with some unable to find jobs, unable to find food to eat, and are multi-dimensionally poor. Government statistician Professor Samuel Kwabena, who revealed the findings of the survey, said the outcome should help policymakers make informed decisions to address the problem.
The 3 quarters of 2022, consistently we found about 1.73, 1.76 of our population that are unemployed. And from the perspective of those outside the labor force, we found about 5.87 to 6.51, ranging between these 2 figures over time. So this is the statistics that we all know. And let's carefully keep that in mind, because we are talking about 11 million people that across the 3 quarters, at any point in time, we find that they are employed. About 1.73 to 1.76 people that consistently we find them as not employed over the 3 quarters. Now we change the narrative to vulnerable employment. The definition for vulnerable employment is simply, are you self-employed without employees? Are you a contributing family worker? And as I indicated, the figure is still hovering around 2 out of every 3 persons that are employed being in vulnerable employment. We see this skewed towards females, and it's skewed towards female to the extent that we find about a 21 percentage point between males and females. So although we are talking about 11 million of our population that at any point in time they are employed, those who are working by themselves, own account workers, and those who are contributing family workers, largely they do not have any forms of contract binding what they do. It's about 2/3 of that. Then we find female dominating among those who are vulnerably employed with a percentage point difference of about 21%. So this is the headline figure that we've always worked with when we come to unemployment, whether it's 13.4, 13.7, 13.9, and as I indicated, we are always concerned about this figure. We didn't deviate from what we know from the census in terms of what our unemployment rate is. During the 2021 population and housing census, we got an unemployment rate of 13.4, and throughout the 3 quarters that we followed the same households, we still have figures in the region of 13.4 and 13.9, depicting the unemployment rate that we have in Ghana. Consistent with our censuses and our surveys, we've seen this as predominantly an urban phenomenon.
For the youth, the outcome is disturbing, with a sizable number in school, not in training, and also unemployed. Let's listen again to the government statistician.
About 1/5 of our youth are not doing any of these. 15 to 35 years. They are not in employment, they are not in education, and they are not in training. We call it the NEET. Not in education, not in employment, and not in training. Honorable Deputy Minister, our goal at Statistical Service is to point policymakers to what we think or how we think they need to target these issues. So it is not just the fact that we put out a statistic that about 1/4 of our youth are unemployed. We're providing further information on where you can maximize your gains if you decide to deal with it. So we interrogate the data and tell the policymaker that it peaks at age 21. So most of our youth at age 21, that is where you don't find them doing any of these 3 things. And that is where you can maximize your returns, rather than targeting the age bracket 30 to 35. So what we show here is that the not in employment, education, and training reduces by age. So once you go from age 15 to age 35, the number of people who are not in employment, education, and training reduces. So if you really want to maximize your gains in addressing the issue, then target age 21. And if you think about this carefully, it coincides with the transition from school to work. It coincides with the number of transitions that we have as a country. So it's pretty easy for the policymaker to target this age bracket and make the necessary returns.
Joining me is Kofi J, data analyst and researcher with JoyNews, with more on the findings from the Ghana Statistical Service. Thanks for joining us, Kofi. So what's the current outlook of Ghana's labor force based on the presentation by the Statistical Service?
Rising up over the course of time.
Analyzing the data.
How many have us big major?
All right. In a bit, we are going to hear from Kofi J, who is a data analyst, also researcher with JoyNews, on the household income survey as presented by the Ghana Statistical Service, which is revealing that 1.7 million people in Ghana are unemployed. We're going to try one more time and speak with Kofi. Can you hear me, Kofi? Can you hear me, Kofi? All right, still having audio issues with Kofi J. If you can hear me, Kofi, I was finding out from you what the current outlook of Ghana's labor force is.
So we've been comparing what the GSS just released to the 2021 population and housing census. And one thing that we found out was that Ghana's labor force has actually increased by close to 11%. So the labor force has moved from 11.5 million people to about 12.72 million people in the third quarter of 2022. Now, if you look at the total number of people who are employed, as far as this labor force is concerned, and in 2021 it was around 9.99 million people. In 2022 third quarter, we are looking at 11 million people unemployed out of the labor force. In 2021 was around 1.56 million people. Currently is around 1.75 million people. So the headline unemployment rate that we see is still around 13.4% as far as Ghana's labor force is concerned.
Let's talk a bit more about youth unemployment and what the report says about it.
Well, so it's good to compare the national headline figure, which is the unemployment rate, to the youth unemployment figure. The national one is around 13.4%, but if you look at the youth unemployment rate, it's around 25%. We've been looking at the trend as well, comparing the 2021 population housing census data to the GSS labor force statistics. And if you look at the 2021 population and housing census data, youth unemployment was around 19.7. It has now increased by more than 5 percentage points to 25%. So that's what we look at currently. It has moved from 19.75% to now 25%.
Does the Ghana Statistical Service give any recommendations as to what government can do to improve the situation? For instance, when it talks about millions of Ghanaians not being able to find food to eat, not being able to find jobs, they are multidimensionally poor, according to the report by the Ghana Statistical Service.
So simply put, if you are multidimensionally poor, it means that you don't really have access to a good healthcare, education, and other social needs. But with the recommendation that you speak about, just like the curve that the government statisticians showed, it tells you that if you look at the age range, if you are moving from 15 upwards, the curve begins to close. It means that people are also now looking for self-employment. They are no longer dependent on people to employ them. That is why, even if you look at the informal sector, the Statistical Service is reporting that the informal sector contributes more than 5 times to unemployment than even the formal sector. But if you look at the sector of the economy, like the industry sector, which is now representing about the least component of the employment chart, the services sector is still leading with around I think 50%, and the industry sector is still below 30%.
Kofi J, thank you so much for giving us more about this survey by the Ghana Statistical Service. I appreciate your insight this afternoon.